Blueberries, a nutritional powerhouse full of antioxidants, beautiful, sweet, useful in a lot of cooking, breakfast, smoothies, the whole works. Surprisingly hasn't been in Australia for as long as you would think, and has really taken off in its popularity since then. However, how do you grow them at home? How hard are they to look after? So I've got a bush here that has not actually been cared for to the degree that it should have been, so I'm going to give you a couple of tips along the way as I need to repot it and give it a bit of TLC and show you a couple of little bits and pieces about the blueberry as we go. So obviously one of the first things to know about the blueberry is, yes, it will adapt itself quite contentedly to pots. Ideally you want to try to grow it in a large pot because they do want a bit of space, but they are quite happy in there anyway. The other trick is they like a very acidic soil. So things like your azalea potting mix is generally a good choice for it. It's always a good idea to have a soil tester as well. This will help. It is one of the many plants that the idea of used coffee grounds with its slightly higher acidic content is actually pretty good for them. So they do quite love that and the other nutrients that they get from it. So another thing to realise with the blueberry as well, for many of you are like, oh, I can't grow plants, oh, they all keep dying, etc, etc. And I was very much like that myself and have been for quite some time until all of a sudden everything started working. It's really weird. It is a surprisingly robust and forgiving plant. One of the things that I have discovered with it that you need to be aware of if you're trying is it will actually survive quite a bit of neglect. It will also survive a bit of overwatering. So it will forgive you for quite a lot, provided you don't go way too far. The thing that will generally annoy you with it is if you're not looking after it exactly right, you don't get fruit, or the fruit's very ordinary in production. That's generally the big thing that will go wrong for you when you're growing your blueberries and not getting it right. Once it does establish itself, it's relatively drought tolerant and it's relatively wet tolerant. It does not like too much water. That being said, it is a plant that can be killed by over loving it, but once again, as I said, it is quite forgiving. It's surprising how much it will put up with. The one that I just showed you has been very badly neglected. It's gone through massive amounts of no watering. It's gone through massive amounts of me watering the living daylights out of it, trying to resurrect it as well. It's still alive. Has been quite sporadic in its actual production of fruit though, and that's where you have your downside. One of the reasons why I need to give it a good repotting now and some TLC, because I'd actually like to get some fruit out of it. I'm also doing it, given it's got flowers, probably not the ideal time, but like many things, it's better late than never. So I'm going to give it a go now. Now, depending on how well you've cared for your plant, how large a pot you have, will also then depend on how hard it is to actually get it out. So be as cautious as you can. If you're like me and it's been quite some time, I've done a couple of top-ups. I've got ants all through it, a bit of neglect. So I'm going to use my standard hosing method, which is not the most gentle, but not the worst you can do either. So keeping in mind, this is quite an extreme example as well. You know, giving a bit of a hose off, it's just broken it up a little bit, cleared a bit of the old dirt away. The main things that you really want to be doing if you've got something big like this and you're actually going this hardcore is you'll want to clear away some of the sides, get a bit away from the bottom and some off that top there so that you can get some good quality new fresh stuff in there for the better quality nutrients. I was also trying to get rid of some of the ants. I think I probably just upset them more than anything. In this scenario as well, I left a lot of the dead branches on there, which are the ones that I would be cutting away and will do later. Part of the reason for that is all of the fresh stuff that I really don't want damaged. That just adds a little bit extra layer of protection for that when I'm rolling it around and moving it. So the theory is that the stuff that I want gone is more likely to break and potentially get damaged instead of the fresher stuff, just a little bit extra there to protect it. That's my theory. Seems to have worked so far, which is good. So in the bottom of the pot I've put some fresh azalea mix. I've actually put a sprinkle of coffee grounds in there as well, partially for the nutrition, partially for the acidity, and partially because a lot of pests don't like them, so I'm once again hoping that that will assist in getting rid of those ants too. So as far as the repotting portion goes, basically the same no matter what the size is. Fill around it. Try not to go beyond where it was originally sitting in its first set of potting when you came from it. And regardless of what the plant is, realistically, after doing a repot, give it a good water. One, helps the potting mix settle in properly, and the plant's stressed. Doesn't matter how tough the plant is, you've just stressed it out. So give it a good drink of water, helps everything settle into place and lets it recover. Okay, now in regards to pruning, so if you're like me and pruning's not a big thing for you, or it freaks you out, or you just constantly forget, one great thing with the blueberry is, generally speaking, it's usually recommended to do very little to no pruning for the first couple of years, basically because it allows it to really, boost its growth. A lot of places will also recommend that you don't actually allow it to fruit the first year, basically to allow it to establish itself better. Whether or not that's going to make a big difference for every single one, not really sure. I think it'll definitely make a difference if you're planting it in the ground versus a pot. When you do get to the pruning part, first and foremost, the part that you really need to be focusing on is all of the dead bits, the bits that are actually dead. It's a plant that'll sort of spread itself out. It'll put out shoots, nice new ones, and generally speaking, you get usually little to nothing off it off the first year. Then it starts to give you, flowers and fruit the next, and then maybe depending on the variety, can go for a bit, and it gets to a point then that it's done and it dies and new shoots have come out. So once it gets to that point that it's dead, get rid of it. It's just taking up space. It's causing friction and potential problems for the plant. Not as much airflow. A very easy way to do it is basically, if it goes snap, get rid of it. Doesn't take much. Then there's other areas for basic pruning. If it's in a bad position, it's not quite right, you can prune it off. A general rule of thumb for most plants is never take more than 1/3 of a branch off, unless you're trying to get rid of that area or it's a problem portion. Blueberry can be a little bit different in that regard, but if you're ever unsure with a plant, use that rule of thumb. The other factor is that a lot of those branches, as they're getting older, if they're still alive, like last year's new shoot, is generally the part that's best for cuttings to regrow new ones. So it likes to have a little bit of age in it, apparently. So the brand new shoots don't tend to transplant as well as a older shoot, but by the same token, if you leave it till it's dead, it's dead. So if you're cutting away those ones as well, try a bit of rooting hormone. Whack them in the ground or pot, and you may actually get yourself some new plants. So let's have a look. So here's several branches that I basically broke off. Some of them broke while I was doing the rolling around, and some of them I just basically broke off afterwards. They literally just snapped. They're dead branches. They need to go. So one of the advantages that I've found, particularly with the larger pots using the hosing method, is it does loosen up. If you wind up with plants that are actually growing in there other than the one that you want, like I had this climbing creeping plant, it does help you loosen it up and actually get rid of those. So if you are in a situation like that, make sure before you repot or while you're repotting, get rid of those. Get them out as deeply as you can, because they will cause problems in the long term. So you need to get rid of them. Now, one of the things I was kind of hoping for was when you look at the way that it grows, it really looks like a plant that you'd be able to separate. So I was thinking to myself, I might be able to make two plants that way. It's not really lending itself that way so much. It's more like a trunk that's just throwing out random branches. I'm sure you could probably do it, but it's not something I'm going to experiment with on this particular plant. But let's have a bit of a look here. So like here you can see this one. Hopefully you can make it out a bit. Like that is an older, slightly older branch. That's got some, you can see it's got a bit of brown and green, and it's got heaps of flowers on it. So that's a slightly older branch. So something of about that age is the sort that you'd try to grow from cutting. Of course, I'm not going to do that because at the moment it's flowering. And then you've got slightly younger ones, which I have a feeling that's not like super young either. Like, look at that, it's got some good growth on it. But there's one really thin one here, and I'm pretty sure that that's new. That one's relatively new. This is sort of branched off newly off an older branch. So there's a few different ways that you can actually grow from cuttings with these. So generally you want to try to cut them close to the ground, because they don't generally prefer it. You can do air layering, that's a whole nother thing all of itself. So that's another option. And whacking some rooting hormone with something like this is probably a good idea as well, because you're hit and miss, and if you're cutting something off that would potentially grow yourself some berries, you want to give yourself the best possible chance that you're actually going to get a plant out of it. So a bit of rooting hormone is always a good idea. Now just another example here. Here I've got quite an old branch, but it's got new stuff growing off it as well. Nice new shoots here, and then an older one here. Now this was an example of what I'm saying. It's like that's still got strength in it. That's not dead yet, but you would probably prune that off. I'm actually going to prune that off and stick that in some soil with some rooting hormone and see whether or not that actually works, because hey, no loss if it doesn't, but a new plant if it does. So that's a good idea there on what you actually get out of the plant. So it wants a lot of sun, wants good nutrition, and there we have a nicely good established plant. So some tips starting from scratch. So if you're going out and you're going to buy yourself a blueberry plant, which to be fair is going to be simpler than getting somebody's cutting and trying to grow from it, unless it's already established. There are a ridiculous number of varieties available, and that can get confusing in and of itself. So first and foremost, when you go out to buy a blueberry plant for yourself that you're going to grow, do a little bit of searching online, work out what is best for the climate that you're in. Some of them are a lot better suited to the colder climates, which is a more natural habitat for blueberries in general, similar to strawberries. They like a cooler climate. And then some are a lot more suited to a warmer climate, which is obviously where I am. I can get away with a lot of it. The subtropical seems to kind of run that beautiful little borderline. However, the slightly warmer climate ones are generally going to be better. So look into that. Find one that's right for your climate. Otherwise, you wind up like a lot of us going, oh, I can't grow anything. And it wasn't that it was the problem. It was the fact that you've got a cold climate one when you're in a hot climate, or you've got a hot climate when you're in a cold climate. And that can be a big thing. So do a little bit of research. There's plenty of info online about them. As I just started doing some looking myself, and it's insane how many varieties there are and how much they are suited to various climates. Then obviously you can grow them from cuttings. If you're ever doing any pruning or cutting or whatever, just do some rooting hormone, stick it in some dirt. If it grows, it grows. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Obviously, some ways are better suited than others. And it is actually possible to grow it from ones that you get from the shop as well. So I'm experimenting with that at the moment as well. So I will be doing a video later on once I've actually figured that one out. Other than that, I hope this has actually given you some ideas with blueberries, possibly taken away a bit of the fear and the mystification of it. But remember, once it's got itself established, it will survive most things. They're a very hardy plant. They will forgive you. Don't water it too regularly. Like a lot of plants, they don't like wet feet, but they do like a decent amount of watering. But they are disturbingly drought tolerant. As I have discovered, that one there has gone through points that would have killed a lot of plants, and it still survives. But you don't get fruit off it if you don't treat it right. So other than that, I hope that's helped out. Grow yourself some blueberries, they're amazing. And regardless of anything else, even if it doesn't fruit, they're a very pretty plant. Enjoy the growing.